Welcome, investigator. Evil is on the rise. Crime is escalating. Our mission is to eliminate the crime by exposing evil, examine why it manifests, and highlight the brave souls that confront it every day. Join us as we work together to bring justice to every victim. Welcome to All Things Crime. Here's your host, Jared Bradley.
Hey guys, it's Jared. It's a special episode of All Things Crime. So basically how this has come about is my good friend here, Tom, and I were talking on the phone, and we got talking about some of the crazy things that's happening and all these wild things that's happening across the world. And one of the main things is some of the cases that I think are more regional, but they actually have national prominence or should, but they're really not getting out there. And so we wanted to expose one of those, and maybe we'll do this once a week or something. We'll figure that out. But this is just kind of our first chop at it. We wanted to, I think some of the conversations that we've had in the last week or so, Tom, has just been really interesting. And some of the insights that we've shared, I think other people really would be interested in them. So we were sifting through a few cases. And by the way, all of you know Tom Myers. He's been on the show before. He is most importantly, he's a ranger, and you can see that picture of him right behind his head. And but he's also just retired from the FBI, led the ERT team up there in Baltimore. So he's seen it all. You know, Baltimore is not exactly nirvana right now. So or your perfect utopia, I guess. Right, Tom?
Right. That's problems.
Yeah. So, in fact, we got to share some stories that you were telling me about, some of the things you would find in the Baltimore city parks and things like that every morning. But before that, there's a case. Well, we had a lot to choose from, obviously. You know, right now there is so much going on in the United States. I mean, that kid from the Massachusetts National Guard just got arrested, and for leaking national secrets. Whether or not he is a hero or a traitor, we're still. I guess it depends on how you look at it, but even more than that, we wanted to select a case that maybe isn't getting the national attention that it really should. And so we found this case out of North Carolina. And Tom, why don't you I bring you in and you can just kind of describe this case and kind of what happened.
That sounds good. Easter Sunday is when this started, and it seems to be a series of conflicts between two neighbors in a apartment complex in eastern part of Charlotte, North Carolina. Mr. Rasalas here, off to my right shoulder here, he was in constant conflict with Miss Miller, who he subsequently murdered over here, and Miguel Gonzales Rasalas right here. He murdered her inside of his apartment, apparently kidnapping her at one point. And from what we know in the various news services that have responded to this, there was a constant conflict. He had a baseball bat. He was beating on her door at one point, one of the neighbors reports in one of the news services, and then ultimately seems to have gotten hold of her, dragged her into the apartment there, and murders her. And murders her most graphic and one of the most demented ways I think I've ever heard before. Do you want me to keep driving on this, Jared? Give you the
yeah. Actually, I and you know what, Tom, I think it's important because the way that he murdered her, and then some of her the burns on her inner thighs, those kind of things. I think it's important that the people understand that, because that all has significance. There's a level of violence here that I think most people are just not accustomed to.
Yeah, he's. I did a quick graphic for it, based on like the autopsy sort of way of doing things, and this is what we know from press reporting so far. And one court appearance has wrapped a wire several times around Miss Miller's neck, bound her ankles with a cable, burned both of her inner thighs, sliced the woman from neck to navel, and severed her tongue. The tongue was removed, and it was found in I believe in a table inside the apartment. It's a really graphic scene. Over the 30 years or so I've been doing this, I can't think of too many that exceed that. So
And they said that there was body, tissue on in different parts around the apartment. So when you slice somebody from the neck to the navel, it sounds almost like he gutted her.
yeah, it does. And then the tissue comment there, and there's a ritualistic component to this too. There was salt poured around the body and 3 handcrafted crosses made out of the broken table legs inside the apartment there. So there's something that he has been influenced by that caused that.
Well, and for those of you that don't know, one of the reasons that people might use salt, that's actually like a torture technique. So if you have open wounds, it's kind of like, when you got scraped up, when you wrecked on your bike when you were a kid, and your mom pulled out the rubbing alcohol, man. Personally, I'd rather go wreck on my bike again. The pain that rubbing alcohol caused. Now, granted, it was used to cleanse the wound, but when you pour salt into a wound, there's an old saying that salt in the wound makes it a lot worse. Well, that is 100% true, and the burn and the intense searing pain that can occur from salt being in an open wound. Um, Personally, I think, based on everything I was reading, I mean, it literally sounds like he was torturing her, not just. I mean, the level of anger that it would take to do this. Like you said, Tom, you haven't seen that very much in your 30-year career. So, what's your
Yeah,
thoughts on it?
bits and pieces of that, but this overkill that happens from anger, and then this almost ritualistic nature. I'm not sure if it's going to be as much torture as it's almost every society, every culture has used salt in funeral and ritualistic practices. It was Easter morning. I can't say one way or the other. My research just doesn't jump out at me at this point, pointing to one thing or another. I don't know ethnically or culturally or where Mr. Rasalas is coming from, what that might or might not mean. But the crosses, of course, it's Easter Sunday, so we have some kind of tie-in from that. What he was influenced by, was it TV, movies, what he's hearing, what he's reading, or was it his upbringing that caused all that other stuff? But the overkill that happened with it, I guess they said her face was shredded, is what the term used in there, and severe beating to the face and everything else. So the overkill and the anger certainly was there, and then the other parts to it, I guess, are going to be exposed in the court hearings. Some of it was so graphic that newspapers didn't want to report on it. But as I go through the wounds and I look at these here, the restraints of the legs, was that just to keep her intact? He suffers, or seems to suffer, from some sort of defense wounds on the face here, the scratches. So that certainly was the case, I would say, as she was fighting for her life. But
Yeah, I was wondering that too.
yeah,
That it seems that in that particular picture, and you guys can go into any of the news agencies in Charlotte, North Carolina, and actually read up on this. But I think it's worth talking about. Clearly, if those are actually defensive wounds on his face, then he probably has those kind of wounds, on his arms and other areas where, if she was trying to fight him off, um, then that's important, because if this had been at a different location, and the sheer fact that he actually did this in his own apartment, that tells you some things too. Either he's not afraid of what the repercussions were, or he didn't care. Which do you think it is, Tom?
just emotionally disturbed. Emotionally disturbed individual that was able to sort of process life and possibly with treatment, and he's able to function uh, adequately until this point, whatever that trigger was. The reports coming in now are that there was a constant series of conflict back and forth with them. She doesn't seem to be, historically, what I'm reading right now, a confrontational type person, but something caused this conflict, and it caused a breaking point in whatever he perceived as happening. So and then he dug into that deep dark well of depravity, and for destroying this person, aside from just killing her, destroying her. So you have all those components to it: the face mutilation, or beating her so badly over there, but also the other ancillary wounds that would probably be secondary, whatever the cause of death was, but be secondary to it. The neck down to the navel wound here, and the burning of the thighs and everything else. So I don't know if we'll ever get to the bottom of it, meaning law enforcement and the public, and him making a statement on it. But it's pretty horrific.
Yeah. Well, I also read that there's enough blood that it actually seeped under the front door and was dripping down the stairs. So just an incredible amount of blood that had to be yeah, I mean, reminiscent of all the blood that was in that quadruple homicide in northern Idaho. Just a brutal murder. So again, it's just one of those things where, what is it about this guy? Did he spurn, did she just completely reject him? Was he making advances to her and she just wouldn't reciprocate it? Uh, from what I was reading, she was a realtor and seemed to be, I mean, just a younger adult female that was putting her life together, but hadn't made it yet. So she's living in this apartment, and this guy's her neighbor. But again, if it reached a point where whatever he felt that she had done to him or not done to him, that he felt justified in killing her, especially on Easter Sunday, for crying out loud, and then making crosses, so if any of you out there would have any kind of understanding of why this guy would make crosses out of broken legs from the table and place them around her along with the salt, definitely make some comments in under the video here, because holy crap, that's just brutal. Now, why would we be talking about this? What does this have as far as red flags that the rest of us should be looking for? These it's well known. We've had over 6 million individuals come up from our southern border, and many of those are going to be Hispanic individuals. Is there some kind of a ritual going on somewhere in the kind of the same type of places that MS-13 would come from? What do you think about that, Tom?
Yeah, I don't know. I tried to do some research to find out what the importance of salt was. It was just sort of an anomaly to the violence there, and see how that's relevant to what he did. So I just don't know at this point until I pin it down, and we'll never get that opportunity to actually sit and talk with him and find out what that was. I would add to that. The leopards generally don't change their spots. He's later in life. I think he's 36 years old, and you're going to find a problematic history of this guy, deeply disturbed, and one of those persons that everybody knew to avoid and not get into conflict with. Just a disturbed individual. But the mental health care in the United States is just not. It's just not there to deal with these type of people. And so what happens is, when they move from area to area, it might look like a quibble over a parking space or something, or being too loud or something like this. But in truth, is probably a very disturbed individual, obviously, from his actions. But prior to that, I think we're going to see a pattern of that, or a series of that. And I don't know what his history is, and that hasn't been revealed yet in anything that I could find.
Well, I'm not sure this is completely connected, but the interesting thing that I've found is, especially as I travel the world, like in Europe right now, one of the things that's happening is there's a fair amount of violence that is created on this male on female thing, where uh, immigrants are coming into countries like Sweden, uh, you know, Norway, places like that. The immigrants are pretty much welcomed, but then as they make advances on to the people that have originally from there, um, if they're not immediately given what they want, then they immediately turn to violence. And I think some of these different cultures mixing in with the original cultures, it's like oil and water. It just isn't mixing. Well, a natural recourse, especially for the more uneducated, unsophisticated type of individual, is to go down to their base model, and that is going to be basically, you know, especially for men, it's turn to violence to get what you want.
Yeah, quite possibly could be that the conflict of cultures is in place, and so it could very well be the case that happened here. I guess we're just not going to know until we have his history. My prediction is you're probably going to see 5 or in excess of 5 police calls to either his residence or arrests or something like that. It could be he's 36. I'm going to say if they're able to track it back to when he's a young man, it's probably going to be pretty intense. And that's usually, like I said, leopards don't change their spots as far as emotionally disturbed, and sexual predators rarely change their spots either. It's just a process of them getting caught. No.
Yeah. So a couple of things that I would want to throw out here. Number one is, do you actually think that they will go back that far, or are they just going to focus on this crime?
Yeah, absolutely, they will.
That's okay. Well, that's number one. And you know, getting a hold of that information and making that widespread and widely known, I think is really important. Number two is, you know, based on where this individual is actually from, um, you know, there's going to be a number of factors. If his background, meaning that the culture that he comes from, is that prone to violence, and number two is, you know, what was there, if anything, I don't know if they will know this or not, but was there any kind of advances that he made as a man toward, you know, the woman, and then if those weren't reciprocated, then, you know, is that a triggering factor for this guy? I mean, to me, everything that's happening kind of in culture right now, it seems that the more successful women get, the more some men are finding that they're not as needed. And when it gets down to the basics, you know, men naturally have that inclination to want to provide and be protectors of women. But if women don't need that, and if they totally reject it, then, you know, is that a slight against him as a man? And, you know, not that that's even remotely an excuse, but it is something to think about.
Yeah, definitely so. In the United States, I go back to being a young man, and the change of societal norms for women in the workforce was a gradual thing. But for somebody maybe coming from another country where it's an overnight effect and you're not used to that, and you and I are both used to that, having worked with many different ally nations in the army, and the what's valued and the mores and things like that are very different than what they are in the United States, even back then, you know, the 30 years or so ago. But you can imagine the culture shock coming from something like that. So it could be very much a predicating factor in this, and could be. We don't know until
Yeah.
we kind of have a history on this guy. And the other thing I'd like to, you know, add to it is say, going back through it, but if this guy, if he has a long pattern in the United States or wherever, they probably will track that back to see if they have any other homicides or attacks like this, the ritualistic in nature. Certainly, that MO that's involved with it, or where has he been if they have unsolved homicides, and you're going to try and track that down. They didn't indicate a sexual component to it, but you know, that could be the case as well, and that's just pretty normal. They're going to disclose the amount of information that they need to disclose to balance the need for the public has a right to know, and the public safety, as well as the court system. They have to confront your accuser and put that out in the public court, but there's also a good amount of holdback on that.
Yeah. So, you know, a lot's remaining to be seen, but thus far we know that the victim's name was Laura Miller. She was 35. This was done on Easter Sunday, so just 5 days ago, in the East Charlotte area. Mostly, the police said the apartments are not one of their high crime areas and are typically fairly peaceful. The suspect's name is Miguel Gonzales Rasalas, and he was 36. First degree murder, theft of a motor vehicle, and destroying remains and concealing death. So that's what we know so far. So anyway, this is just one of those crazy violent. I mean, to really, you would have to have some kind of a background in law enforcement and in criminology to really understand how violent this was. I mean, literally, he beat her to death with a baseball bat, and but then she had all sorts of other wounds, and so hopefully more details will come out. So, all right, Tom, any last words about this one?
No, this is I do a little bit of the cold case work, and some of the things that I do in concert with that, and a lot of collaboration, is we'll look at something like this, and because the police are often overwhelmed with cases and metaphorically bodies piled up when they're having to act on that first 48 hours on that. So they'll work this thing back to a degree, but how much can you do that? But if there's something strong enough on this case that's just eating at you, then you're probably going to find something in the history on this person. It becomes more difficult if you go offshore or down to the Hispanic background. I'm saying South or Central America or something like that, but it could be from an area right there where you have multiple unsolved homicides. It's a bit of an anomaly because you have a rage attack, and it's not so much a serial killer with a cooling off period in between where he's attacking this, and we just don't know if there's a sexual component to it. But these guys are like those wolves that have fed. And this is a small, a very short impulse control type individual who just has constant problems, it seems like, with the conflict with her, and then just lost his cool over here. So you're probably going to see that pattern of an irrational attack, short impulse control, and you're probably going to see those attacks that have happened. But there could be other ones. In the golden age of serial killers, going back maybe 70s and 80s over there, guys were able to escape and evade law enforcement by just slaloming in between these jurisdictions. So less so these days with the DNA, but another challenge is taking into account that he could be from another country. That could very much be a component to it. Or he's operating under multiple identities. That could be a case as well, but the DNA will eventually, if this has a sexual component to it, it could very well, solidify the case against him for other cases.
Yeah. Well, once they get his DNA in there, then hopefully they'll be able to. Well, if there are any other unsolved cases, like you said, the CODIS match will hopefully link them up and be able to solve some other cases. So, all right, Tom. Hey, great discussion, man. I just wanted to throw this out there really quick because, if there are other people that fit this guy's description, I mean, not necessarily the racial, but like what Tom was saying, the quick to anger, just triggered by seemingly small things, then not only do you need to avoid those type of people, but also make sure that you are consciously aware of your surroundings and you're never caught by surprise. So, all right, Tom. So any last words?
Yeah, I would add this. The police are overwhelmed. They have a lot of cases, and as these homicides come in, they stack up on them and they work through them. They can't address every single lead out there. So if you know something about this guy, had past history with him, make it a point. Be a good citizen and contact the police. If you can't do that, make a comment on our channel right here and at least add something to the equation rather than it gets lost for years and that we don't have another victim floating around out there that they can't address because they just don't have the ability to go back and find these persons. They can't find unknowns. Just add that to it.
Absolutely. All right, buddy. Hey, thanks. We'll talk to you later.
You too. Take care, Jared.
Thanks for joining us. Your attention today brings us one step closer to exposing and eliminating the evil that brings crime to our communities. Hit subscribe and share this episode. Together, we will bring justice to every victim.